Okay, so in this video I'm going to talk about scientific notation. So we're going to look at what scientific notation is, how to work out, how to change numbers into scientific notation format, and then we'll have a look at some examples of how you add, subtract, multiply and divide in scientific notation. So firstly, a number is, can be written in scientific notation if it's written in the form generally a times 10 to the power of n. So a has to be greater than or equal to 1 or less than 10 actually. So we'll just put less than 10 here, and n up here will be an element of z, so n is going to be an integer. And that's it really. So we're going to write a number like this: a by 10 to the power of n. This number here has to be somewhere between 1 and 10. It can include 1 but not 10. And then this number here can be any positive or negative whole number. So, or 0 indeed. So let's have a look at some examples of how that works. So let's have a look first of all at something like 24,000. 24,000. We want to write that in scientific notation. So first thing you do is, if you look at this number here, the decimal point in any whole number here is going to be here, right down out at the end here. We usually don't write the decimal point for whole numbers like this, so but it is actually here. You can write it as 24,000.0000 and so on, but we leave it out normally, so it's here. So what we're going to do is take that decimal point and we're going to move it back here till we make a number between 1 and 10. So it will actually end up here at 2.402, 2.4. Now we want to multiply this by 10 to the power of something to put it in this form here. So now what we're saying here is 24,000 is equal to 2.4 by 10 to the power of something, okay? Now what would we have to do to this decimal point to bring it back to here again? Well, we've put it in here, so what we would actually have to do is multiply by 10 to the power of 1, 10 to the power of 2, 10 to the power of 3, 10 to the power of 4 to bring it back to where we want it again. So 24,000 is just 2.4 by 10 to the power of 4. We're just multiplying 2.4 by 10, 0, 0 with 4 zeros here, 10,000. So we're moving the decimal point to the right 4 places. Okay, let's look at another one. Let's say 4750000. We put in another few zeros here. Okay, so let's see. The decimal point is here. We want to bring it back until we make a number between 1 and 10, and we find that it will end up here between the 4 and the 7. So we'll end up with 4.75. Now these two numbers clearly are not equal, so we can't have an equal sign in here. So we've got to change this number back into this number here by multiplying it by 10 to the power of some number. So where is the decimal point? The decimal point is here, and we want to move it back out to here again. So we need to move it to the right, which means it's going to be a positive power. And how many places? Let's see, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. So it's going to be 10 to the power of 8 here. Okay, so that's it. Let's do a small number then. Let's see, let's take 0.00000462, something like that. Okay, now again we're going to change this into scientific notation. So the decimal point, we can see it now, it's down here to the left. This time we have to move it to the right until we form a number between 1 and 10. So if we keep moving it up along here, when we put it between 4 and 6, we end up with 4.62. Now we have a number here between 1 and 10. So to change this number here back into this number here again, we would have to multiply it by 10 to the power of something. Now the decimal point we see is here. The decimal point is going to be here, yeah. So we want to move it back in this direction to the left. How many places? Let's see. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 places to the left. Now when you're moving it to the left, what you're doing is multiplying here by 10 to the power of 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, minus 6 in this case, minus 6. So when you're moving the decimal point back to the left again, you multiply by 10 to the power of a negative number. And when you're moving it from here to the right, you multiply by 10 to the power of a positive number. Okay, so that is it. I mean, if you think about it, 10 to the power of minus 6 is 1 over 10 to the power of plus 6, which is this number here, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So in fact, what you end up doing is dividing this number here by 1 over a million, or 1 over 10 to the power of 6. Sorry, you're dividing by a million, multiplying by 1 over a million, dividing by a million. In other words, moving the decimal point to the left 6 places. So okay, that's how you actually change numbers. Maybe we'll just do one more quick one just to emphasize it. Let's see, we'll take 0.000429, so the decimal point is here. We'll just change that into a number between 1 and 10 first of all, so the decimal point is here. So move it up along here until we end up with a number between 1 and 10. So we see that we have to put the decimal point between the 4 and the 2. So we end up with 4.29 now. Now, again, these two numbers here are not the same. 4.29 is completely different to 0.000429. So we must change something on the right hand side. So what do? We have to multiply this number by something. What do we multiply it by? Well, it's going to be 10 to the power of minus some number, because we want, remember, the decimal point is here. Decimal point again is here. So we want to move it to the left. We want to move it back down the left here. How many places? 1, 2, 3, 4. So that would be 10 to the power here of minus 4. Okay, so that's how you change numbers to scientific notation. Why do we actually do this? Well, if you can see, this number here is a very big number. This number here is a very small number. There are a lot of digits in these numbers. And rather than writing out these numbers, if you're writing some kind of a report or something like that where you have to use these numbers a lot or write these numbers a lot, it's a lot easier, a lot quicker to write it this way rather than this way here. So usually, if you're doing astronomy or microbiology or something like that, where you're dealing with extremely large numbers, distances between planets or suns or stars, or you're dealing with distance between atoms or electrons and protons, things like that, very, very small numbers, you would use scientific notation quite a bit. Okay, so let's have a look now at adding and subtracting these numbers, multiplying and dividing them, things like that. So let's just take some examples, probably the best thing to do. So let's take 2.5 by 10 to the power of 3, and we're going to add that to 3.2 by 10 to the power of 4. How do you add these two numbers? Okay, so what you normally do here is, you can do this on your calculator, by the way. Your calculators will have something like this, EXP button, exponential button, or it'll have 10x, something like that. It varies from calculator to calculator, but find this button on your calculator and you can do these things fairly easily. But if you want to do them kind of semi-manually, if you like, what you can do is convert these back into a normal number again, if you like. So multiply 2.5 by 10 to the power of 3. That will give us 2500. Remember, the decimal point was here. We got to move it to the right 3 places. So we're going to go 1, 2, 3. So the decimal point is now here. We've got to convert this now. So that's 32000. So the decimal point was here. Again, we move it to the right because the power is positive. 1, 2, 3, 4 places. Now, what you can simply do is just add those two on your calculator or do it manually. So it's 2500 plus 32000. That gives us 34500. So that's 34500 here. Okay, so now you can just convert that back into scientific notation again. As I showed you earlier, the decimal point is here. Move it back here to 3.45. by 10 to the power of what? Well, it's here, we got to move it back up here, so it's 1, 2, 3, 4, so it's 10 to the power of 4. So that's how you would add two numbers. Subtraction is exactly the same. I won't go through that. It's exactly the same. Convert both these two numbers to this kind of format here, normal format if you like, and then subtract the two numbers, you'll get an answer. Convert that number into scientific notation. Okay, so let's take multiplication and division then. So again, let's take an example. Let's take 4.8 by 10 to the power of 9. We're going to multiply that by 7.2 by let's say 10 to the power of minus 13. Okay, so we're going to multiply these two numbers. Now everything here is multiplied, so this number is multiplied by this number, is multiplied by this number, is multiplied by this number here. So really, you know, multiplication is commutative. In other words, we can move numbers around. So really I can multiply this number by this number here. So I mean, I could switch it around if you like. 4.8, I can multiply that by 7.2, which is multiplied by 10 to the power of 9, which is multiplied by 10 to the power of minus 13. Now, if I multiply these two here on their own, I get 4.8 multiplied by 7.2, and that will give me 34.56. 34.56. Now, I can multiply these two as well by just simply using the laws of indices. Remember, if you have 10 to the power of something times 10 to the power of something, you multiply the two somethings, the two powers. So, you add the two powers. If you have 10 to the power of 9 times 10 to the power of minus 13, you add the two powers. So we did this before in a previous video anyway. If you have a to the power of p and you multiply by a to the power of q, you just simply add the two powers. You end up with a to the power of p plus q. So that's what we got here. 10 to the power of 9 times 10 to the power of minus 13, add the two powers. So we will get 10 to the power of 9 minus 13. 9 minus 13 is minus 4. Okay, so this is it. We've multiplied these two numbers here that were in scientific notation. However, our answer is currently not in scientific notation as such, because this number here, or a here if you like, is not between 1 and 10. Now, this number here is multiplied by 10 to the power of minus 4. So we need to turn this number first of all into a number between 1 and 10. So I'm going to take the decimal point and move it back here. That will give us 3.456. Now what happens here? Well, if you think about it, if you were to say convert this into normal format, what you would end up with is 0.0034556. So the decimal point was here multiplied by 10 to the power of minus 4. So move it to the left 4 places. You would go 1, 2, 3, 4. Now what did we do? We took the decimal point and put it between the 3 and the 4. So we put it here. So now what do we end up with? We would have to multiply that number by 10 to the power of minus 3 for it to end up in the same place. So if the decimal point was here, we would have to, convert this, if you like, into scientific notation. That would be 3.456 by 10 to the power of minus what? Well, we had the decimal point is here. We moved it up here. To move it back again, it would have to be to the power of minus 3. So here we just simply end up with 10 to the power of minus 3. So this is our answer here when we multiply these two numbers. Okay, so let's look at one where you have to divide two numbers. It's very straightforward. It's exactly the same really, or something similar really. Anyway, it's 8.6 multiplied by 10 to the power of 11, let's say, and we want to divide that by say 4.3 by 10 to the power of minus 3. Okay, so again, this is division, similar to the multiplication here. It's the same kind of process. You use the laws of indices again. So let's see how you do that. Well, we're going to take the 8.6 by 10 to the power of 11, and we're going to divide that by 4.3 by 10 to the power of minus 3. So we can divide these two anyway, and then we can divide these two. These two are easy to divide, we just use the laws of indices. These two here we can use a calculator, so we have 8.6 divided by 4.3, and that gives us 2. Handily enough, so that's 2 or 2.0 if you like. Now, what about these two here? Remember in the previous video as well, if you have a to the power of p divided by a to the power of q, what you do is you subtract the power. So you end up with a to the power of p minus q, top power minus the bottom power. So that's what we're going to do here. So it's going to be 11, 10 to the power of 11 minus 3. So that just simply gives us 2.0 by 10 to the power of 11 plus 3, which is 11, 12, 13, 14, so that's just 10 to the power of 14 here. Okay, now if you ended up with the decimal point in a different position here, you would have to do the same process as we did up here and adjust the power, but it worked out nicely for us here. So that's really adding, subtracting, multiplying and dividing and converting numbers into scientific notation.